I think there are some really serious ramifications of this legislation. The first thing that's going to happen is that we are going to know that the labels that are on the products right now can't be updated to reflect the most recent science through this voluntary pathway of label updating, which means that when new science emerges, it's going to take even longer to get it onto the label to warn people about it. And this is an industry that is known to sell dangerous chemicals. These are known toxins. There's known carcinogens, there's known neurotoxins, and there's known endocrine disrupting chemicals. And so I think that there is going to be more harm to people if this goes through because they're already selling things that they know are dangerous without the proper warnings. What are they going to sell when they know they can't be sued?
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. Sometimes provisions are included in federal bills that kind of go by practically unnoticed by most, though they will have a huge impact on the American public. This is the case of Provision 453 in the current House Appropriations bill for the fiscal year 2026. The provision will, in effect, create a kind of liability shield for pesticide companies, protecting them, basically, from lawsuits. And this means that if you are made sick by their products, you basically have no legal recourse, even though scientific evidence points to the harm caused by their products. This is a bonus episode today with Dr. Alexandra Muñoz. She is a toxicologist and an expert on such things, and we've invited her on to talk to us about what this provision means and its implications on us right now. We'll learn more about its impact, the ripple effect, and what it all has to do with and how you can take action to communicate to your U.S. representatives in the House and the Senate that we do not want this bill to be moved forward with this provision. For more information on who your representative is, go to congress.gov/members so you can find out exactly who your representative is and how to get in touch with them. Let's get straight to this interview, which we conducted in Washington, D.C. the last week of July. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Alexandra.
Thank you so much, Hilda, for having me here.
So you're in D.C. right now because of some big pesticide shield immunity bill. I don't even know if I understand it all. So help us know what's going on. Haven't farmers always used pesticides?
Farmers haven't always used pesticides. That's a new, a relatively new business that's come out. And they've been using them for a long time, though, without a liability shield. And now the companies that sell them are looking for a legal form of immunity so that they're not liable for any lawsuits or harmful impacts from their products.
But why are they looking for that now?
Well, that's a really important question. It's because the company that Bayer, which purchased the company Monsanto that sells Roundup, is receiving so many lawsuits for cancer that their product causes. And they're paying out millions to people that have been harmed by this product. And instead of changing the label on their product, they're looking for a liability shield. They're looking for a way out so that they don't have to pay anyone anymore.
What would happen if they would actually just relabel it?
If they just changed the label and put a cancer warning on it, then they wouldn't be liable for any of these failure to warn lawsuits because then they would have warned the people.
But they don't want to do that?
They don't want to do that because they know that if they put a cancer warning on their product, people are going to be less likely to buy it and it's going to affect their sales.
That's true. If I saw a skull and crossbones on a product, I'd be like, get away from me.
And if you saw something that said, if you get this on your skin, it could lead to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, would you buy it then?
No, I wouldn't. So they are lobbying to get this liability immunity kind of protection in place. Now, why is this kind of secret? I heard someone say this is like a secret vote.
Well, what happened this week was that there was some language slipped into an appropriations bill. And in the Appropriations Committee, an amendment was proposed to remove Section 453, which contains this immunity provision. And instead of doing a roll call vote where we could see how everyone voted on that amendment to remove it, they just did a voice vote. So we don't know exactly who was opposed for it and who was in support of this amendment to remove it.
Does that mean that the politicians don't want it to be known? Kind of in history, they don't want it to be known which way they voted. Why would that be?
I think that's exactly what's going on here, Hilda. They are realizing that people are very angry about this. They've had moms calling all week saying that they don't want this. And instead of sort of standing up for their own position, they're hiding it so that it doesn't become a voting issue when it comes to primaries next year.
So how political is this?
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is I understand that the Make America Healthy Again movement, that was the platform by which Trump was elected. And by the way, the Weston A. Price Foundation is apolitical, but I'm just asking because I want to know how it plays into it. They are all about food. Do they care about this bill? Because that's a Republican platform. But I heard that the vote was evenly split and that the Republicans were for this pesticide liability immunity.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing. So I've been working on this in a number of states where it's been proposed earlier in the year in Tennessee and North Carolina. And in both of those states, initially, all of the Democrats were opposed to the liability shield and all of the Republicans were in support of it. So it is really falling on partisan lines here.
But why would any party support this?
I can't really understand it myself, but it seems like they want to protect businesses and they want to protect farmers. And they're hearing from the company themselves that's been proposing this legislation that if they don't give them this immunity, this liability shield, that they're going to go out of business and that their favorite farming chemicals are not going to be available anymore. And then there might even be a global food shortage. That's what they're telling everyone.
All right. Well, so let's get specific here. So glyphosate, for example, some of these farmers depend on that because they have gotten accustomed to using it with certain crops, right? And so if this goes through, maybe they will be sunk.
Well, I don't think that's the case, actually, because this type of legislation has already failed 2 years in a row in Iowa, and they're still selling their chemicals there. This legislation isn't trying to ban any chemicals. And not having it isn't going to create any bans of chemicals. It's just leaving things the way that they are. And so the only risk is that this company maybe will decide that it's not worth it for them to sell these chemicals here because of all the lawsuits that they're facing financially. Might not be the decision that they want. And then maybe they won't have access to them. But here's the catch. Glyphosate isn't patented. And so there are other companies selling glyphosate, and the farmers that really want to use that will still have access to it, even if Bayer goes out of business.
But they're acting like, no, don't take my glyphosate away from me.
Yeah, they've run this massive fear campaign with ads and so much lobbying. They've gone to all the farmers directly and told them, we need this piece of legislation or we're going to go out of business. And they have genuinely convinced people across the country about their narrative. And that's why they're pushing it, and that's why they're having success in some places.
Well, and I understand that this immunity, this clause in this appropriations bill, actually will protect also foreign and domestic companies. The reason I'm bringing this up is because isn't it ChemChina, the producers of paraquat, which is this very intense chemical that is found and sprayed over all kinds of soil. Actually, it's banned in China, but this Chinese company is selling it over here. Is that true?
That's so true. It's really wild when you think about that they're selling something that they banned in their own country here in the U.S. Paraquat is known to cause Parkinson's disease, which is a neurodegenerative disease. And that's really sad that they're willing to sell it, intentionally poison Americans. And now they're asking for immunity to do that as well, because they're also facing lawsuits.
Interesting. So again, just to reiterate, you're not saying, ban paraquat forever, which actually sounds good to me. But anyway, or ban glyphosate forever. You're just saying these companies need to be held accountable for the consequences. Because if this gets passed tell me if this is true, Alexandra. If this gets passed, if someone were to get cancer or some degenerative health condition, they really wouldn't have a leg to stand on in court against these companies.
That's right. So we're not trying to ban anything by being in opposition to this piece of legislation. And this legislation has actually nothing to do with taking any pesticides on or off the market. What it does impact, though, is how those things are labeled and whether those labels are considered sufficient to warn people about the actual risks of these products. And the way that they've structured the language in these different types of legislation essentially gives them immunity from lawsuits.
How did they get this in an appropriations bill? I'm not sure I understand some of the ins and outs of this stuff.
Well, this is so tricky. And this is what is the other thing that's happening here is that they're getting sneakier and sneakier in how they're trying to sneak this language through. Because at the beginning of the year, they ran it as its own bill in different states and they lost in a lot of states.
Oh, yeah. I think I heard about that because we had Kelly Ryerson on the podcast talking about such a thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so they were doing it kind of more boldly and it was being shut down. So they're like, maybe we can sneak this in some other bill. And I guess this is how it happens on the Hill, right?
I'm not sure exactly how things happen, but they have definitely started to be way sneakier. I watched it happen in North Carolina where they snuck it into the Farm Act there. And so it's a lot harder sort of to fight something like this when you have to get it removed from a big piece of legislation. And now it's pretty clear that they don't even want anyone to know what they're trying to do because the language of Section 453 is so confusing in terms of how it actually creates immunity. When you first read it, it doesn't sound like it's giving a liability shield or immunity at all.
So what does it sound like?
It sounds like it's just reiterating some labeling rules or taking funding. It's pretty unclear. If you've never read anything like this, it just sounds like they're doing something to the labels and you don't really even know what it means.
And I think I heard a doctor say recently that, yes, this label language sounds very benign. But she said, know this, that they were aware that glyphosate was harmful 30 years ago. And here we are today still trying to get the product labeled. So this shows how slowly the wheels of the EPA churn so that even if it is something specific about the label, it will cause a ripple effect that will make it hard for the consumers to know what they're using or what's being used on their soil and on their food.
Exactly. The label is so important. And that's why there's this big fight over the label right now on pesticides and on food products. And who can put what on the label is what these big industries are trying to control. They essentially only want the EPA to put information on the pesticide labels because they've kind of captured the EPA and they've figured out how to game the system so that when they submit their own data to the EPA, they can structure and then they write their own label. They've gotten it so that their product that does cause cancer has no cancer warning on it. And so what this piece of legislation does is it blocks sort of the obligation. It blocks their ability to voluntarily update their own label with a cancer warning. And the reason that that's important is because when they still have the ability to voluntarily update their label and they don't do it and they don't properly warn people, then they can be held liable in court for that. And that's when they lose these lawsuits. But if they block the funding to update labels voluntarily, they can just go to court and say, it was impossible for us to update the label. There's no funding for it to do it through that mechanism. We can only put on the label what the EPA tells us to put. And therefore, our hands are clean.
Oh, why does this remind me of like Pilate in the Bible, washing his hands saying, I have nothing to do with this. Oh, very interesting. So if this passes, they don't have a legal obligation to voluntarily update the label. So why would they? Why should they?
Well, they still have a legal obligation to warn under the state product liability code. But in the federal law, it's impossible for them to comply if this goes through. And that creates this special thing called impossibility preemption that gets them off the hook in these lawsuits. And that's what they're after here.
Whoa. So what happens really, Alexandra, if this is passed? Like, will more people get sick without recourse? Will life continue as it has and we won't even notice? Like, what do you expect the ramifications to be?
I think there are some really serious ramifications of this legislation. the first thing that's going to happen is that we are going to know that the labels that are on the products right now can't be updated to reflect the most recent science through this voluntary pathway of label updating, which means that when new science emerges, it's going to take even longer to get it onto the label to warn people about it. And this is an industry that is known to sell dangerous chemicals. These are known toxins. There's known carcinogens, there's known neurotoxins, and there's known endocrine disrupting chemicals. And so I think that there is going to be more harm to people if this goes through, because they're already selling things that they know are dangerous without the proper warnings. What are they going to sell when they know they can't be sued?
Oh my gosh, it could just escalate, in other words. But now let's look at the other scenario, because I would rather look at that. Let's say it gets shut down. Then what happens?
Well, then we're just back at the status quo, right? So they're still selling all these dangerous chemicals, and there's still a fight over what's on the label. But at least in some states, they can mandate additional warnings, potentially. And you can still sue them, which is actually more important than it might sound, right? Because being able to sue a company like this is an important mechanism of accountability. And during those lawsuits, during the discovery process, they have to hand over all these internal documents. And that's so important here. That's where we've seen the fraud and collusion that's happened within Monsanto and also, in Syngenta related to Paraquat. We see these emails where they lay out the fact that they don't want to do this toxicology testing because it's going to lead to results that they know they don't want to see. And they're like, okay, we can't use that toxicologist, and we need to find someone that wants to work with us our way. And we're going to stop this test right away. And so all that information about how they're acting fraudulently is available when we still can sue them. And it allows for this transparency and accountability that is so important for this industry and for everybody's health and safety.
So critical. It reminds me of the papers that Naomi Wolf and her team put together, the COVID papers, where she was able to get a hold of internal Pfizer documents that showed that they knew the harm these shots would cause. And so this kind of transparency is needed, and if it has to happen through legal means, so be it. But I want to go back to something. I talked to Kelly Ryerson, like I said, and she said, if glyphosate is ever pulled from the market, let's just say Bayer after a while is like, everybody knows this isn't good, I'm just going to pull it. She's concerned that they're going to put another, even more dangerous and unhealthy toxic pesticide on the market. What do you think of that?
I think that's totally possible. That's essentially what they have done. So they've changed their Roundup formulations that are available for the home and garden use, the commercial use, and they've replaced glyphosate in some of those with 4 other compounds, and some of them are seemingly more acutely toxic than glyphosate. I think it includes 2 banned ingredients already, ingredients that are banned in other countries as well. So there's clearly no motivation by this industry to make choices that are protecting people's health. And that's, I think, really the most concerning thing here, is that they don't care. And we can see that from an array of choices that they've made. So it is very likely that they'll start selling something more dangerous.
Oh my gosh, that's so scary. But so now let's talk about what we can do. So literally, we're in DC right now, and you and some other folks, without any compensation, you're not professional lobbyists, are just going to raise awareness on the Hill. Can we do that wherever we live?
Yeah, you can raise awareness right now. It's so important that we get the word out about what's going on here. So I think sharing information with your community, with your family, and with your state legislators, because honestly, this could be coming to a lot of states again next year. It doesn't look like they're giving up yet. And so raising awareness online and in person that this industry is trying to achieve this and that we all need to work together to stop it is really important right now. So that's why I'm actually so glad that we're talking about this today.
Yeah, me too. And so going back to exactly the chemicals that are being spread and so forth, I saw something in one of the papers about forever chemicals, what they call PFAs. How are they involved? Are they going to also have like some kind of liability shield related to the kind of off-gassing or the stuff that's going to come off of some of their products? I'm confused about that a little bit.
So this piece of legislation regulates 1,200 active ingredients that have been registered at the EPA that are regulated under this act called FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act. And it includes all kinds of things: pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides. And some of those products do contain PFAS, these forever chemicals. And sometimes they are not necessarily the active ingredient. They could be contaminants in those products. And so, there's also other uses of PFAS that are not part of chemicals regulated under FIFRA. So it won't affect all of them, like flame retardants wouldn't be in this group of chemicals. But there are some things that do include those chemicals. And so those types of things would get immunity under this provision if it goes through.
In other words, if our family gets sick because we have exposure to some of these forever chemicals, again, no one would take our case, is what I've heard. No one would say, okay, let's stand up for the company because they have a way out.
Exactly. They have a perfect legal defense if they get this. And so the lawyers are unlikely to even try to take a case. And that's kind of part of what's so sneaky here, is that you can still technically sue, right?
Yes.
It's not blocking you from suing. And that's what they like to emphasize when they're getting the legislators to talk about it, is you can still sue. We heard that so many times in North Carolina and Tennessee. We were like, well, that may be true, but you can't make it very far with that action. It might get dismissed at the first motion to dismiss, or as you said, the lawyer might not even take it up because they know that there's this defense already there for them.
Right. Which makes me wonder, Alexandra, what do you say to the naysayers who are like, you're anti-farmer, or like, it's easy enough for you to say you're against these pesticides and forever chemicals, but we need these in these products to keep farming the way we're doing it?
I would say that having this or not having this isn't banning any chemicals. And that's really important to keep in mind. The company can still sell what they want to sell. All we're saying is that leave things the way they are. These companies still need to be accountable, even if an important industry depends on them. And probably more so, because do they really want to be potentially poisoning the people that are their biggest customers?
And that's a really good question that maybe we all need to ponder for a little bit. I mean, it always boggles my mind when I think of the people that work at these companies. There are people like you and me who are trying to feed their families and ostensibly do good for the world, I guess. But maybe, are they unaware, do you think, some of them?
I do. Yeah. I've spoken to a number of farmers and legislators in the last year or in the last several months while I've been working on this. And I've had multiple people sit across from me and tell me, I'm a farmer. I use glyphosate, or I use 2,4-D, and I've been using it my whole life. It's my favorite pesticide, and I've never gotten sick from it. And so that's kind of this cognitive dissonance that we have to encounter, is that people have the experience of using them and haven't gotten cancer. So it's hard for them to understand that it does cause cancer. But that's kind of the tricky thing about cancer, is that something can be a carcinogen, and in some cases it will cause cancer and in others it won't. And that is to be expected.
Right. And of course, when you say the person says, I haven't gotten cancer, I'm imagining in my mind an ellipsis, and it's like, yet.
Exactly.
Because these toxins accumulate. When I think about PFAs and paraquat and glyphosate, and I'm like, oh my gosh, these things, and diquat, they're being used right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we get our little produce even from the farmer's market, and unless it says organic, we can't be sure that it isn't being used on those very produce pieces that we're buying.
Yeah, you're right. Toxins accumulate, and also their impact accumulates. And that's what I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand about cancer. So I'm a molecular toxicologist, which means that I've taken a lot of time to study the molecular mechanisms at the level of the cell of how these toxins lead to cancer.
Mm.
And what's really interesting about this process is that there's a lot of steps to it, and it takes a lot of time usually. There's a delay between the exposure and the development of cancer. And during that process, these long-term low-dose exposures can lead to the progressive development of cancer. And so sometimes it can be hard to put two and two together, because you could have been using it for a number of years and not gotten cancer until one day that shows up. And so I think that's part of it, is that there needs to be also a deeper understanding of what causes this process and what promotes it and what does that look like. And it can be an acute exposure, And it can also be an acute exposure combined with low dose exposures or just a low dose long-term exposure.
And even if we don't live near a farm, I remember talking to Beth Lambert from Documenting Hope, and obviously Kelly Ryerson, Stephanie Senoff, people who have studied this glyphosate and toxins at length. And they say that it can be found in our urine, and it's because it's in the air and it's in the water and it's in the food. Is that right?
Yeah, it's showing up in all types of biomonitoring that people are doing in their urine and in their blood. And it seems to be, the exposure can happen through drift exposure, and, other pathways as well. And so it does, we are in a moment where there are a lot of exposures in a lot of ways. And so everyone is really impacted by the presence of these chemicals.
And I do want to talk to you about this on a next podcast or some other conversation, but I want to broach on it a little bit today. What would you recommend as a toxicologist in terms of lowering our everyday exposure?
So there's a lot of ways that you can make an intervention into your daily life to reduce your exposure, especially if you have kids. You want to sort of take some time to think about that. And that's what I teach parents about in my course, is how to think like a toxicologist, because you have to start thinking like a toxicologist to reduce your exposure, because it's so tricky now. It can be in anything, right? And so you have to start seeing, okay, this type of material might have toxins in it that leach out and can impact my kids. And this type of material also might have toxins that leach out. And so you can start changing out the materials that you use, like plastic, for example, leaches so many endocrine disrupting chemicals that as much as you can reduce your children's exposure, your family's exposure to plastic, it's a great thing.
Yes. Did you hear about that study where they found that even water in glass bottles had microplastics? But what was even more alarming, let's just say it had, let's say 17 parts of microplastics in the water. But water in a plastic bottle has like thousands compared to the glass bottle. And it's nanoparticles, not microplastics, nanoplastics, meaning they're more easier to enter into the bloodstream in the body. Do you think that's right?
I don't know. I saw that people were talking about that paper, and I was like, at some moment, I need to read that paper really carefully and see if this is true, because it's pretty surprising that the glass bottled drinks would have higher levels than the plastic drinks.
I don't think it had higher levels, but I think it had surprising levels, which is what people. And the other thing is, I actually heard, Alexandra, that it came from the cat.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, not the bottles.
I think it's definitely possible. And that's kind of why it's so tricky, is because there are things, everything is coated with something now, and it's what's that coating made of, right? And more importantly, is that coating leaching and releasing its chemicals into whatever your thing is? And a lot of times it's so hard to answer that question without measuring something, right? Like even the manufacturers that say that they're being really green and that they're taking all the precautions, but then they use a new chemical, for example. They're like, this is totally safe. It's a new chemical. Well, how much have you tested it? Who's tested it? Is it just that there's no data right now that says that it's dangerous? So we also have to look out for that, is these sort of false claims about things being green or non-stick, non-toxic. It's hard for me to believe that exists. It might just be that they haven't tested it yet. There's no data yet. And, that is a dangerous deception.
Wow.
Right now.
But so this is why the Wise Traditions lifestyle, we really espouse so many things that are natural, including the fabric of the clothes that we wear. Yes, definitely our cookware. We're looking for what our ancestors used as much as possible, because you'll go crazy like looking at every single little label and trying to keep your kid away from plastic. And there's plastic in clothing too, I'm sure.
Oh, I know, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And of course, the flame retardant chemicals. I used to think I was a bad mom because my kids would just sleep in my husband's t-shirts and I didn't have like flame retardant pajamas, but now I'm glad.
Yeah, that's good that you didn't have flame retardant pajamas.
I know.
Yeah, there's so many things we have to look out for. And I think it can be so overwhelming for people when they start to see the landscape of toxins that are around and then want to implement things, especially when they've got young kids and you suddenly have to change all certain routines and the way you're doing things. And so that's what I try to help with in the course for parents. But I think you're right. Like focusing on simpler solutions in a lot of cases, less processed things is usually, because still we don't always know what's in something, but is usually a good way to reduce a lot of exposure.
And so going back to the big picture about this particular bill, we're going to try to get this podcast out as quick as possible, Alexandra, because people can act. So yes, you can do things on the micro level in your home for your children, all the things we're talking about, but also it's important to raise your voice on this macro level, right?
It's so important right now. And we're at a moment where the piece of legislation that we were watching passed the Appropriations Committee in the House with Section 453 in it, which contains the immunity provision. And the next step that's going to happen is that now they're going on a break for the summer, right? So they have a break, I think, till the beginning of September. And then there's a chance that it could be brought to the House floor for a vote. And that could be really quickly, or it could take a couple months. We don't really know. But it's important to start contacting your own representative and telling them that you do not support this provision and that you want it completely removed from the federal Interior Appropriations bill. And we'll put the exact language maybe in the notes so people know exactly how to refer to it, because it is kind of a long name.
Yeah. And I do understand, too, that we sometimes encourage people through the Weston A. Price Foundation action alerts, like send an email. If you just cut and paste, that gets less attention and has less pull with the legislator than if you actually make a personal call and use your own words about your concerns.
Exactly. It's so great if you can just write your own email from your heart, letting them know that you are genuinely concerned about this, and that as a parent or as a constituent, make it personal about your life. Why don't you want this? And why are you opposed to it? So they know that they're hearing directly from their own constituents that this is an important issue that they're aware of, that they don't want it, and that, ultimately it might be a voting issue for these representatives and for during the next election.
Well, speaking of personal, I want to ask you to maybe take off your molecular toxicology hat for a second and answer the question I love to pose at the end of every podcast. Alexandra, I want to ask you this. If the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, just one thing, what would you recommend that they do?
That's a tough
biggie.
one.
It's a biggie. And it could be any simple thing, a lifestyle hack or a food hack that you would recommend. Just one thing that might get them started in the right direction.
I think focusing on having good water is really critically important, because we drink so much water every day. So if you're drinking tap water and you've never had it tested in your home, you might want to consider doing that and getting a filter for it. If you're drinking bottled water from plastic containers all the time, then you might want to move away from that, because that has a really high microplastic exposure. I think anything you can do to improve your water so that you're drinking water that doesn't have toxins in it all the time would be a really important first step for people to take.
Wonderful. Water is life. So, Alexandra, on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Hilda. I'm so glad we got to talk today.
Me too. Our guest today was Dr. Alexandra Muñoz. Visit her website, toxicology.riverwind-institute.com for more and for information on her upcoming courses for parents. And I am Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this week's episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now a simple reminder to join hands with us. If you're enjoying this podcast, if you love the foundation and its mission of education, research, and activism, become a member. It's only $30 for the entire year using the code POD10. Go to westonaprice.org, click on the Become a Member or Why Join button, and join hands with us. After all, you can become a part of the Weston A. Price Foundation family. You'll get a quarterly journal as a perk, along with other things, in addition to the satisfaction knowing that you're making a difference for everyone's health. And thank you so much for listening, my friend. Stay well, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.